truth is that evils and slichas, you can use his Gemara.
You're freezing a little bit, Rabbi.
What was that, freezing?
Yep.
Nothing I can do about that, unfortunately.
No problem.
Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai Perek Vav Halacha Hey. We're going to be learning Daf Samach. We left off on Daf Samach Amud Aleph Mamish on the top of the Amud. We just learned in a Braisa where we clarified and we limited the Shita of Beis Hillel in the Mishnah. The Braisa tells us that Evet Shel Anavim, a vat filled with grapes, and Uma'aton Shel Zeisam, a vat filled with olives, can only be sold to a chaver, and we clarify that's even lebeis hillel when the vat is large, however you define large, because since the olives or the grapes at some point in the near future will become mukshar, and therefore, if you're going to sell it to a non-chaver, it will become tamei, and then when he separates the trumos become truma tameya, and we're not allowed to do something that will lead to that. So we can only sell it to a person who's a chaver, who we know, who took upon himself, who had a Kabbalah, to adhere to all of the detailed halachas of Tuma and Tara. Now, the Gemara today is going to extrapolate from this Braisa that puts together both the case of the Anavim and the case of the Zeisen, that when we spoke yesterday, remember about from what point will the olives become muksha lekabel tuma, machlekes beishamai beis hillel, from when you put it in the vat, from when they begin to stick together. Look, from this braisa, we'll extrapolate that whichever shita you'll follow, lebeishamai or lebeis hillel, it will become mukshar midoiraisa, and that will be a problem to Rabbi Yochanan as we'll unpackage the Gemara. I'll explain why we extrapolate that it's doiraisa. Maybe it's only the Rabban, and I'll explain that when we learn the Gemara inside. And this is going to lead us, this discussion, and Rabbi Yochanan, upon whom initially we'll have a problem with, this is going to contradict Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to learn a Mishnah in Taharas. Let me just introduce the concept. This Mishnah actually is brought in Bavli Kedushin Daf Pei, and we're speaking about a case where you have a child. A child is presumed to be Tamei because his mother, who even when she is a Nida, will hug him. That's the normal. So a child is Becheskas Tamei. What happens if you find a young child near a dough, and in the hand of the child there is a piece of a dough, which you can assume is from that dough? Machlekes Rav Meir and the Chachamim, whether we say that the child was the one that tore the piece of the dough off, which would mean that prior to that, prior to him separating it, it was one dough, the child touched the dough, so the dough is tamei. Of course, the piece in his hand is tamei, but we therefore say the whole dough is tamei. Or do we say, why would we say that? The dough is becheskas tahara. You don't see the child touching the dough. Maybe an adult tore a piece and gave it to the child. So we're going to see over there, Machlekes Rav Meir and the Chachamim, there's going to be a statement that Rabbi Yochanan makes. All of that will lead us to a Havamina that Rabbi Yochanan holds, that the whole mukshar of the olives, the whole the olives becoming susceptible in the vat is only a midrabanan, and that will be the initial contradiction. And the Gemara is going to clarify that Rabbi Yochanan's statement connected to the Mishnah in Taharos was not also in reference to our sugya, but it was in reference to another sugya, which is the sugya called chiburim. These are very important klalim. What's chiburim? The Gabbai is here. In Tumah and Tara, let's say I'm an Av. I'm an Av because I'm Tommy B'Tmei Meis, which I am, which most people today are. Okay? Now, if I touch something, I'll make it into a Rishon. Question is, how do you define that something? So if I touch liquid, it's all connected one to the other. I don't care if I touch the drop of the liquid in the cup. All of the cup becomes a Rishon because I touched it. And chiburin is, there are certain items that maybe you can argue the individuated, right? But they're all stuck together. there is a certain point where we view it like one gush, like one dough, and therefore we say that even though I only touched one part of it, it's not pshat that only that part is tamei, and maybe the circle around it is tamei on a level lower. It's all as if it touched me. We're going to learn a little bit about the dinim of chiburim, and finally, the Gemara today is going to give us a whole new understanding in the machlokes Beishamai and Beisilul, which we explained yesterday, and we're going to begin today. Is all based on the issue of it becoming mukshal lekabel tuma, and now how can you sell it to a non-chaver when the non-chaver is going to make a tamei? You're going to make the tuma tameya. We're going to have a whole new understanding of the Mishnah, okay, which we'll explain in the Gemara. And if we'll have time today, on that Samach Hamid Beis, we will at least begin to explain the Seifa of Halacha. And again, just to quote the words, Shnayim Shabatzru Karmeim L'Toich Gas Achas, right? Two people, each one has their own vineyard, and they harvest the grapes, but they make their wine in the same vat. And these two people, one is a Ma'aser, and one is a person that's not an Eman, that's not Ma'aser. So the Mishnah says the words Hama'aser, not only Yeshaloi, but also B'chalke B'chol Makim Shehu. So if we'll have time, we'll begin to introduce the initial understanding of the Gemara that our Mishnah is following the Shita that Ein Bereira, but that in itself won't be enough. As we'll explain, we will also have to add to that the Shita of Rabbi Meir that we have learned earlier in the Masechta, that Lo Yimtiru Limkar Demai Elo L'Sita in Bolvad. We'll explain all this if we have time to get into that part of the Sugya. But Chavre, let us start now on Daf Samach, Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Am. Okay, says the Gemara that the Evet Shalanovim Loi Toirahi. The Braisa spoke, as we mentioned in the words of introduction, as we had on Daf Nun Testament base. The Braisa gave various examples, which also included Evet Shalanovim and Uma'atan Shal Zeisim. Now, when it comes to grapes being in the vat, therefore, sure, Chabra, the liquid that oozes out of the grapes are considered wine that will be machshir the grapes midoy raisa, and therefore the Gemara is suggesting it must be that the evet shel zeisim here also, when we quoted yesterday the machlokes Beishamai Beisilul as from what point, which is not relevant, but whichever point you're going to follow, those juices that automatically ooze out of the olives, they also are going to be machshir the olives midoy raisa. Now, before we go on, let's learn. Today, let's go with the Marafulna. Okay, Yakir, wake up. Evet shalanavim loy toida. Bitmiya. Is it not minat toida? In other words, of course it is. Everyone agrees that that when you have a vat that's filled with grapes, for sure, hey, okay, so that's number one. Let me just take a quick step back, Simcha, that halachically there are only 7 liquids that are able to be machshir food after the food was disconnected from the ground. The mnemonic, the simon, is yad, shachat, dam. Remember that. Yad is yayin, dalid is davash. I'm saying there's 7 liquids. Shin is shemen, right? Shachat, ches is chalav, milk. Tes is tal. And dam, the dalid is for blood, and the mayim, the mem is for mayim. These are the 7 liquids. For sure, when you have grapes that are already in the vat, prior to the grapes being in the vat, even if the grapes will ooze out some liquid, the owners don't want for the grapes to lose any liquid. So therefore, since that liquid is without the ratzon of the ba'alim, for sure it's not machshirit on any level. In contrast, in the vat, for sure, midoy raisa. At the end of the last widest line on top of the Gemara in the Marafulda. Since the Braisa juxtaposes ma'aton shel zeisim lo avot shel anovim, shma mino, it must be shegam ma'aton shel zeisim. Here's the word by zeisim, by anovim, the liquid that goes out is going to be called mashkin hayotzim min anovim. It has a din here of the yayin. By grapes, by olives, there are 2 words that Chazal use. Guys, we'll need this for today. Moihal and shemen. Shemen is only when it's squeezed. It's the thicker. Moyal is as juice. We're going to speak later. We're going to speak soon about machloikis tanoim, whether moyal is considered shemen. So he's saying that some place that says moyal. Very good. But let's go over here. So now hamoyal vehashemen, he puts it together now. Hayoytzemehem machshirim gamken azeisim in atoyra. Now, why are we saying? Why does it have to be that way? Why just because the Braisa juxtaposes two scenarios, why does it have to be that since for sure, that's for sure, when it comes to the Evet Shalanobim, the liquid that comes out of grapes in the vat for sure is machshir, the grapes midoiraisa, who says that therefore the case of the Evet Shal Zaysim is doiraisa? I'll tell you why. Chaim Kanievsky explains. Because if the Evet Shal Zaysim, if that scenario is only a hachshara midrabanon, the Braisa needed only to say that case. And if in that case, we already said yesterday, not only Lebei Shammai, since it's a large quantity, al pi halach, Lebei Silu, you can't sell it to a chavel, so I would know on my own, avade, right, kal v'chomer, that if there's an issue of tumah doiraisa, that's the raya. That's the way he explains it. The fact that the Braisa needed to give two cases is because the case of the Zaysim is not midrabanan. It's midoiraisa. You can always ask, so why give two cases? Why give three cases? We're not going there. The Braisa, especially the Braisa, not the Mishnah, will give as many cases as it likes. But that's the presumption that we're not going to challenge it. Since from this Braisa, we're going with this logic. Just like Hanova is doiraisa, Zaysim is midoiraisa. Now, and b'meilo what? Now, v'kasha, this will become a question. Al Rabbi Yechanan, Yishma'in lay. We're going to quote soon Rabbi Yechanan. That's quoted in Kiddushin Babli Daf Pei. The Amar that he says, "L'choura the ma'aton shel zeisim ein nechshede elo chumra derabanan v'loy min ha'torah." And therefore, how can Rabbi Yechanan go against the Braisa? That's just explaining where we're going. Okay, now we're
even according to Zaysim's side, one of the Yudchas Kesedus, the soul's made to be sham to wait till the gas, even before it comes to the matter, even before it comes to the gas, it's still much. The soul's made. From the Rabban the Kalabus is not focus in that regard.
Doesn't matter. Okay, so okay, so Michal is making a good point that in the Shmoina Sodava we have over there in Shabbos Daf Yud Beis. One of them is midrabanan. Even though, like I mentioned, the rotzing haba'olim for the juice from the grapes only begins in the vat, but midrabanan they began it a little bit early. It doesn't change anything over here. The Braisa spoke about evet shalanovim for sure doiraisa. Let's use the logic of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. If evet of Zaysim would be midrabanan, the Braisa only would have said that. The fact that the Braisa gives two cases or juxtaposing one to the other, however you learn the pshat, evet shel Zaysim, the issue whenever it becomes Lebei Shammai, when you put it in there, when there's moyal, Lebei Silol, when it's already so gooky or so soft that three or more stick together, doesn't matter. It's a doiraisa. That will be a problem on Rabbi Yechanan. Now we have to go to Rabbi Yechanan. But first, let's read another few lines. Keep your finger. Let's go today with the Marafolda, but let's go right in the Gemara, then we'll go back to the Marafolda. Leis hada pliga al Rabbi Yechanan. It won't just be a problem on Rabbi Yechanan. We've already pointed out many times for the newcomers that really, just to know how it works, the kasha is on a amoira. How can you argue with a Tana? The way Yerushalmi always words it is that it learns a Mishnah or Braisa, and it says, Leis hada pliga. Well, isn't the Braisa arguing with Rabbi Yechanan? Just to know, it's worded keilu. We're asking on the Braisa. It's not just. It's the signaling of the Yerushalmi is that way. In the Bavli, the signaling will always be the opposite. How can you, Rabbi Yechanan, argue on the Braisa? In the Yerushalmi, it's always that way. In the Braisa, so isn't this in disagreement with Rabbi Yechanan? Gesundheit. Yeah, the Braisa disagreement, and that's what it means. And that is the Amar Rabbi Yechanan. The Amar Rabbi Yechanan. So before, okay, let's read the words. Keshem she'amru katan chumren. Just like the din of katan is only a chumra derabanan. I'll tell you in a moment what that is. Kach amru. These are the words of Rabbi Yechanan. Ma'atan shel zaysim is also only a chumren. Rabbi Yechanan was referring to our case. Now, what are we talking about katan? So we mentioned this in the words of introduction, and let's read it now, guys. The first wide line in the Mara folder under the Gemara. Keshem she'amru katan chumren. So in Mesachta Tarois, Perigim Mishnah Ches, we learned over there Tanat, and not only that, he already tells you that this Mishnah is brought down in the Bavli at the end of Mesachtas Kedushin on Daf Pei Yom Adal. What's the case? Tinoik b'tzad betzek, and also ubetzek biyadi. So you have a child, Vlad. Child is becheskas tamei because his mother, who's a nida, will always hug her child, even when she's in the state of a nida. He doesn't know about these dinim. So a child has a status of tamei. Period. Now,
is it a permanent status?
Permanent status of tamei. Oh, now, if you take the child and you take him to the mikveh and you make sure he doesn't touch anything, then you can give him trumas, which is what they did. Now, you have a dough. A dough, we're speaking about a dough that's becheskas tara. I'm mentioning cheskas tara because if you remember the Gesudi over there in Kedushin, the fact that the dough has a chazaka meikara is very relevant to that sudi. Here you have a child, in his hand there is a piece of a dough. You can see the piece of the dough in his hand is coming from the dough that's near him. What's the question? So Rav Meir holds, which is a leniency, a chiddush, that we don't assume that the child was the one that pulled it from the dough. We do say, you know what? Maybe an adult was who's tahar, took a shtickle of the dough, gave it to the child. Of course, the piece in his hand is tamei, but the one that's on the ground remains with his cheskas tara. That is shitas Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim holds, these are the words there. Darkoi shel katan litapeyach. That's what the many parents say when they get frustrated. They try to console themselves that it's not personal. That darkoi shel katan litapeyach. The word litapeyach means to poke everything, to touch everything, to tap everything. So therefore, roiv, it's a roiv. According to the Chacham, they don't put together the miyut what Rav Meir does with the chazaka meikara. That's the topic. They say no. Darkoi shel katan litapeyach. Roiv katan litapeyach. Circumstantial evidence. There's no adult here. We have to presume that the dough is tamei. That is what the Chachamim hold. What Rabbi Yochanan is machadesh, something very big. That forget about putting the chazaka together with the miyut. Tamei makes sense. The shita, the Chachamim is only midrabanan. Let's read it now in the Marafur. Okay, the Amar Rabbi Yochanan that the tiamuhu likatan zeh. Even though the Chachamim say it's tamei, right? Dakar katan tapeyach. Oh, lefisha Chachamim asu kimi sheyesh beidas lishoel. Now let's remind ourselves. What did we learn from a Masechta Soita, from the din of a Soita? That when you have a suffix tuma, b'reshus hayachid, not hilcha Shabbos reshus hayachid. Simply remember this. Reshus hayachid means when there's only one or two people present. Suffix tuma, whenever there's only one or two people present. Midoi raisa, you have to be machmir. What happened over here, l'chayra, is that there's a suffix because the cotton has a piece of dough. Near him is the batzik on the ground. That's what we're judging. Even the chachamim, we don't know for sure, but we have macharoiv. We have macharoiv that probably the cotton was the one that ripped it off. But Reshus HaYachid means there was no one present to know whether the cotton ripped it or whether the adult ripped it. That's when the Chachamim say that it's tamei, it should be midoi raisa. It's not that way. Why is it not that way? Because even though we learned from Soita that midoi raisa, suffix tuma, but Reshus HaYachid is tamei, that's only if it's like the case of a Soita that whether they'll be honest or not, I don't know. Probably not. But the question is on a person to whom you can ask what happened. In other words, it's called sheyesh boy or bahen da'as lisha'er. Masha'enkein, many cases that we learned all over Shas, where you have a rodent and you have a keli, and maybe the mouse had this and touched that. Not the mouse you can ask, not the keli you can ask. No, it's whenever there was no one present, it's for the Reshus HaYachid, and there's a possibility of tumah. But if there's no one there, then if there's no das lisha'el, then even though midrabanan will be machmir, but it's not midoi rais. How do you view a tinoik? So there's two ways of looking at it, right? From what age? But what Rabbi Yochanan is insisting that even though the Chachamim will consider him midrabanan, like a human being, in the context of yesh by das lishoel, midoi raisa, we cannot confer das lishoel on a mind. Now, I don't know until what age that goes. I don't think that this goes until bar mitzvah. Maybe yeah, maybe not. But for sure, the tinoik, which doesn't limit the minimum age, there is an age. That's what Rabbi Yochanan is arguing. You can't say he has das lishoel. So Taka the Chachamim say tamei because roiv ketanim or darkoi shel katan litapeyach, but it's only midrabanan. Okay, that's one statement. There's nothing to do with this yet. Let's just finish reading it inside. And the loy and lamaynaf kamina whether the batzek alatzad is tummy that I said that abanot. So that's the big rule. Let's say the batzek. Let's say it's truma, and truma temeya may not be eaten. It could be used for fuel, but truma temeya should be burned actually, because we are afraid that if you don't burn it, someone will mistakenly eat it. They'll eat truma tameya. Any truma that's only tamei midrabanan, truma and kachim, that's the rule. So toilin, which means you wait until it becomes tamei, and only then can you burn it. So that's what Rabbi Yechanan is now paskening. He's saying that loishatimu vaday lisrif all of truma v'kachim ela litlois she'enu elo chumna derabanan. Now, that's simple. So what does that have to do with this? Nothing. But look inside the next line in the Marafol. The guys were around 6 lines into the area under the Gemara. But Rabbi Yechanan made 2 statements. He says that not just like the Shitas Chachamim in the case that we just quoted from Babli Kiddush and Daf Pei is only midrabanan. Kach Amru Ma'atan Shal Zaysim. These words now is Havamina is this case. That what? It's only a chumrin. So says the Mara Kasal Kadaita. The Hashas, the Rabbi Yechanan, that when we quote over there in Shas, these statement of Rabbi Yechanan, what was he referring to? Amar Lamil say, Anas. Almas Nisan, the Perek Tes was the Haris, the Tranosim. Like we quoted yesterday, Machlekes B'Sham and Mesila from one point, that Hazeisim, Emes Hanekabum Tuma, Vishiaziu Zeis Amatan Allah. When it begins to sweat, any moyal, boom, etc., etc. I know there's a Basil. It's not the point. So Amar Rabbi Yechanan, she'ein zeyas hama'atan machshin min ha'toyre rak chumra d'rabbanani. That whole thing, that's what I mentioned. There's moyhal, we'll speak more soon. There's moyhal, or moychal, there's shemen. Rabbi Yechanan, he said it's d'rabbanan. We understand now. He meant to say that whole vat is only midrabbanan. D'chei mashma be'perik basar d'me'ila. V'hod Amar asu kema'atan shel zaysim u'lefikach maksha hashas over here mi'braisa hazois. We just quoted yesterday on that Nun Testament base of Braisa that juxtaposes Eved Shel Anovim and Eved Shel or Ma'atan Shel Zaysin. The Mashma Mina, however you learn, whether it's juxtaposed, whether it's a Kal V'Chomer, Sheikh Shedon Torah, Kama Eved Shel Zaysin. So Habachakasha against Rabbi Yechanan. Let's read it again inside. So again, Leis Hadah Pliga al Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan, that's a given. Kshem Amru Katan is only Chumrin because a Katan doesn't have Dasli Shoel. So to consider him as if he has Dasli Shoel and therefore to apply the rule that Safek Tuma B'Reshus HaYachid Sfeikoi Tamei is for sure the Rabbanim. And he said, Kach Amru Batan Shol Zisam Chumrin, and the Havamin is he's talking about our case. So Rabbi Yechanan said that our case is the Rabbanon. How can he say that? One from the Braisa Smashma, that's the Oiraisa Kasha. And probably this would take a half an amud. You understand how it goes in two words? Okay, answers the Gemara. The Girsois here are extremely important. And I know that whoever's using an art scroll, he put inside Rabbi Yoinam, it mamish will not work. We'll see this, we'll see the Gra. The Gra over here right away amends it. Can be. So it's Rabbi Chizkiah b'Shem Rabbi Yirmiyah. And I want to say the following, and I'll speak this more in a few minutes. You know, there's Rabbi Chizkiah, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Chizkiah b'Shem Rabbi Yirmiyah. Big difference. This is Babli Yerushalmi. Amar means he heard it directly from him. Amar Shmuel, Amar Rav. Shmuel Amar Rav. Shmuel Amar Rabbi Yehuda. He was a Talmud from both. He quoted them. B'Shem, that's what the B'Shem means. He didn't hear it directly. So when you have a B'Shem, there's always the possibility, you hear a story about the Rebbe, could be the story didn't happen. It could be a very small possibility. But we'll see over here that when they actually asked Rabbi Yirmiyah whether it happened or not, Rabbi Yirmiyah is going to say, I never said it. That's going to be cute over here. So I'm just going to say, so now Amar Rabbi Yoina won't work. You'll see an Amud base. So now, whether the Gra found another Girsa, see inside over here, he just takes it out. So Rabbi Chizkiah b'Shem Rabbi Yirmiyah, Zok Tazoi, this is great, that that Rabbi Yechanan was not referring to this. Ma pligin, it's so funny. Rabbi Yechanan made a statement. The first presumption of this b'Shem Rabbi Yirmiyah, which Rabbi Yirmiyah never said, but let's begin what they told Rabbi Chizkiah Maisa that the Rebbe Gezog is that Rabbi Yechanan made a statement to argue with someone else. That's also funny. He told you he was arguing. No, if he said something, someone argues. So when he's coming now to explain what Rabbi Yochanan was talking about, Dimeret, he's not saying Rabbi Yochanan was talking about something else. He says, what was Rabbi Yochanan and whoever he was arguing with, what were they arguing about? Okay, so now we know at least that there was someone that argues with Rabbi Yochanan, or Rabbi Yochanan is arguing with someone. That's with Derech Hagav. So ma pligin, bichiburin. So then, what are we talking about? So look inside. Okay, today it's on the Maraful. So Amar Rav Chizkiya Hada pligi. By the way, the Marafulda doesn't even have Luchur, doesn't even have B'Shem Rabbi Yirmiyah. Or he had B'Shem Rabbi Yirmiyah, but since Anamid Beis, Rabbi Yirmiyah himself will say, I never said that. But Rabbi Chizkiya stood his ground. Chizkiya holds of this concept. So maybe he says, Chizkiya had gesagt, that what? Hada pligi. So he says, look inside, guys, 10 lines from the bottom. That Rabbi Yochanan or Bar Plute, Rabbi Yochanan and whoever he was arguing with, when they were saying that Kishem over there in Kiddush and Daf Pei, Kach, the Kach was not about this. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan will be moida that when you have olives inside a vat, whatever Beishamai Bisilul stage, the moihal will be machshir the olives midorais. When he said that Kishem over there is midrabanan, he said the words Kach ma'atan. It was a whole different case. What's the case? Let's read it inside. Tan b'taris. Peidites mishnachez. Here we go. Naga hasheretz bu'um shabamatan. Now, we said this in the introduction. It's very simple, Vlad. If I'm Tomei, right, and let's say I have beans, a big bowl, and I stick my finger in there. I was not Matami the whole bowl. Why? Certainly not Midoraisa, even though they are all in one cake. Because every bean is viewed as separate. The ones that touch my finger, if I'm an ab, becomes addition, right? However you work it, if there's liquid, however you work it, the abundance, however far down it goes. Let's say Erchlan or Mashkin goes down until a sheni. So the beans that touch my finger become a sheni. But if I put my finger in a dough, not water, dough for sure is considered one guk, and therefore the whole dough touched my finger. So that's what we're talking about. We want to know, how do we view the guk of olives in the vat? See, they begin to stick to each other. So, says the Mishnah that if a sheretz, for example, touched the whole means it touched one piece of shebema'aton, says the Mishnah, have a lechibur, ke'ilu naga b'chol ha'um. Now, the Mishnah didn't say Doraisa the Rabbanan. It was for that Rabbi Yochanan was arguing with his Bar Plute. We don't even know who it is. All right, let's say it's Reish Lakish, just for argument's sake. So let's say Reish Lakish had gesagt, when the Mishnah says it's a chibur, doiraisa. So Rabbi Yochanan says, nah, it's the Rabbanan. It was regarding that. In other words, the fact that they were mukhshar, that's doiraisa. The one that touched the sheretz, doiraisa. But when the Mishnah says the whole thing is viewed as mechubar, that's the Rabbanan. Va'al zois amar Rabbi Yochanan that the hashetimu kol shuvamatan ina mechubar the Rabbanan. B'lemin ha'toidam. Why? Here's the rule, guys. A good klalim. Because this comes from chala. Simcha, this is exciting. This is exciting for the whole day. Okay, a dough. Why did I say that a dough is mechubar? Midoraisa. That's the rule. Nashach means when you have something that if you rip it apart, you know what ends up happening? Let's say the right and the left, something of the right will be anayin gebissen in the left. Something, that's what you see. Some of it is on the right. They bite, they pull to each other, they bite into each other, they stick to each other. That's called mechubar. Any item, even when it's together, it's guk, so it's gooky, so it's sticking. But if when you separate it, right, like lecha mishnah, you know those challahs that are one piece, that are many pieces. Right. Can you say that no? There's many bilkalach all stuck together. Or not, because since when you rip it apart, they bite into each other. So when they're together, it's one guk, so it's one challah. That's the rule. If when you break it off, they would not stick into each other, then you can say they're not connected. Certainly not midoy raisa. It's not that we leave nachamish from midoy raisa. Okay, I'm making my own inyan, but let's go back. Tahainu shedevukim kol kach v'yachad achim yiparekechem lechaverin noichach zemizach haticha kama yisei v'demei. Beautiful. So all of that answered. In other words, Rabbi Yechanan's kishem kach was not regarding our topic, and therefore we stand our ground and we accept the premise that the Braisa is putting together Evet Shal and Aviv, Umayatan Shal Zeisim, they're both a Mukshar and Lidraisa. Let's read it inside. Leave it inside the Gemara.
So this is how it is Bezeisim. It's Mikshar Chat.
No, only Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Bar Plute. Rabbi Yochanan holds that even though the Mishnah says it's Mechuber, it's only Midrabanan. That's what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. B'chlal, generally the rule is if it's Rabbi Yochanan and Shlakish, we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan. Chutz me, the next Yakir. Remember the class? Okay, let's go right. Go pick your brain. You have to wake up. Okay, very good.
Wouldn't it be Mechuber with the Mashra to say so?
No, the mashke is machshedet. You see, it's because it's not noishach. No, that's all Rabbi Yochanan. It's not noishach. So B'chol is asking a good question. That like I would say like this: if it's soaked in liquid, or if it's filled with liquid, then let's say I'm the shed. The shed touches the liquid, so all of the liquid becomes tamei, and it becomes nocharisha midrabanan no matter what, and then everything will become a shame. Must be that there isn't enough liquid for you to say that. Good point. Okay, let's go ahead. Now let's go like this. Back in the word. Which means nashuch is chibur d'oraisa. Ma'uch because that's one of the movement. That ma'uch ain't a chibur. Ma'uch means what we're talking about over here. They're gooky together. The cha here the Mishnah is implying the Mishnah that Mahi quoted Pedig Test Mishnah Chesen Taharo is afilu ma'uch chibur. Is a raya Muslim Zogan says Rabbi Yochanan that it's only midrabanan. But what the last words in the Amud. So what are we concluding? That the premise is good. But even Rabbi Yochanan will agree that Hechsheden is Minat Torah. Okay. Now we had the gears again. We're going with Amar Rav Chizkiah, B'Shem Rabbi Yirmiyah. We took out Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan heard the conversation. Rabbi Yochanan was wondering whether Rabbi Yirmiyah Taka said it. Because in the Beis Medrash, everyone else thought Rabbi Yochanan's statement, Shem Kach, was regarding our topic. It was regarding over there, the din of Chiburim. So come Rabbi Yoina im Rabbi Yirmiyah. Look inside the Pnei Moshe. Lebasar deshama mit Rabbi Chizkiah. In other words, this was said like the Marafulda. Who actually said the answer? Rabbi Chizkiah. We'll go with the gears that Rabbi Chizkiah b'shem Rabbi Yirmiyah. It wasn't Rabbi Chizkiah Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. If it would be Rabbi Chizkiah Amar Rabbi, if Chizkiah would have says, I was told from Rabbi Yirmiyah, no one would have the. You don't do it that way. You don't go to. Did you actually tell it to him? It didn't work that way with the Amoiroi. But when someone said B'Shem Rabbi Yirmiyah, B'Shem Rabbi Yirmiyah means he was already moida that he didn't hear it directly. So Rabbi Yoina asked him, "Come im Rabbi Yirmiyah." Im Rabbi Yirmiyah means look inside the Pnei Moshe. He asked him, "Did you taka say it?" Look inside the words of Pnei Moshe. That at Amrat Hadon Milsa, Kamoisha Shemat Yemim B'Shmecha, he went to verify. Did you taka say what Chizkiah is saying? And he told him, no, never. Amaloi, and Amaloi at Amrat Hadon Milsa, Amaloi Rabbi Yerim responded in mini, not me, in mini. Actually, not only not me, I disagree with it. In other words, you know what I hold? I hold that. Why would Rabbi Yochanan have to say that the chiburin is only midrabanan? So when the Mishnah says it's tamei, all of it is midrabanan, I would not say that because I hold that the moichal is only machshen midrabanan. I already knew the whole Mishnah is midrabanan. Now, by the way, that will make a kasha on Rabbi Yirmiyah, the kasha that the Gemara began today on Rabbi Yochanan goes on Rabbi Yirmiyah. That's what the Gemara is going to be the next step. But he's saying it wasn't me because I feel achshedon. Even the fact that olives become mukhshad in the vat, ve'hen chumrin is a derabanan. So if that's a derabanan, I would never quote that Rabbi Yochanan needed to say that the issue is derabanan because of chiburim. The ganze Zajac is midrabanan. Gavaldik. How great is that? So now the kasha is now we're going to the kasha we had on Daf Samach on the top. But Hatani didn't we learn that Bishavin, that both Bishami and Basil agree. And that means that Basil is moida lebishami whenever there's a larger quantity, however that is. So the guy that's buying it is not going to go eat it up. The guy is going to go make it into oil. Whether it is a large heap of chitim, we're speaking to a person who is not yet a chaver, or ve'evet shalanovin, or ma'atan shel zeisim. We're just quoting the brayso we had in Daf Nun Tesama base. El chaver. Or we said that even if you don't sell it to a chaver, there were certain people that were non-chavedim that for their business, for the manufacturing, they would only hire chavedim. That's also okay. Because bottom line is, the way we're learning until now. We're going to change everything soon because we don't want it to become Truma Tameya. And again, the same words, the Eved Shalanovim is the yeah, for sure. And therefore, juxtaposed, or would have been a Kalvachemer, so therefore, my Kedoin means, how will we now answer Rabbi Yirmiyah? How can Rabbi Yirmiyah hold? I never quoted the B'Shem. You're quoting me? I never could have said that. I don't agree with the whole thing. Everything is midrabanan. So answers the Gemara. I'll tell you how. Oh, this is great. That it's really subject. There's a machlokes between Rav Meir and Rav Shimon. Once we'll make the question of whether the moihal in the vat, whether it's a mashkin midoirais or the rabbanan, if that's a machlokes tanoim, that will be the teretz. That I paskin that it's a the rabbanan. You found a braisa, you're making a deal. Enjoy your deal. I agree with your kalvochaymer. I agree with your juxtaposition, but that follows the other Tana. And let's find out now, where do we find out machlokes tanoim? So Tiftan, I'll tell you that braisa follows Rav Meir. The bar plukta here, Rav Meir is Rav Shimon. The Rav Meir Amar Hamoyel Kamashke. Now let's look inside the Pnei Moshe. I like the Pnei Moshe. Okay, the Pnei Moshe is the last narrow line. Tifta lahach braisa kerav Meir. Guys, look inside. The Rav Meir Amar Hamoyel Kamashke. What are we talking about? Where do we find this? Pedig vav the machshir. Tanin Allah b'Mishnah hey. That what we're quoting now. B'Hamoyel Keshemen. She'ein Hamoyel yoytzim edei shaman devid Rav Shimon. In other words, Sfira lei Hamoyel Gufoy hayoytzim and azeisim loy have a mashke. Rav Shimon holds blood that moyal. Let me use the word fluid. Okay, fluid means that you did not squeeze the olives. That will be the definition. When you squeeze it, what comes out is going to be called shemen. When the juice oozes on its own, technically it's called moyal. When you put it in the vat, you got no shemen. All right, Rav Shimon holds that the moyal, which is gufoy hayotzim and azeisim, lo yave kamashke. However, umikol makim machshir hu, Rab Shimon will tell you that once you squeeze the olives, what happens when you squeeze the olives? Oil comes out. Now that oil will be inside the other moyal. In other words, it's not that Rab Shimon will say that moyal will never be machshir doirais. Rab Shimon holds that the only reason why moil is machshir midoiraisa is because there is shemen in it. That's Rab Shimon. Rav Meir Oimer. We don't need any shemen. At all. Rav Meir holds no moil itself. He said Yad Shachadam. The shemen is including moil. And coming back over there, that when you put it in the vat, there is no shemen yet. So Rab Shimon, in the case of our braisa, will hold that the whole achshara is only midrabanan. Rav Yirmi has the right to say, I paskin like Rab Shimon. You found a braisa mashma that it's doiraisa, that goes to Rav Meir. That answered it. Period. Okay. Now let's go back to the whole Mishnah. Everything we learned until now is based on a premise that the Gemara is going to say could be understood differently. What was the first ratio of halacha? That machlokes b'shamay and b'silu. B'shamay holds that you can only sell the olives that are in the vat to a chaver. Why did we say? I'll tell you why. Because since you still have to tithe it, this is a case where there was no issue with selling it yet, but it has to be tithed, and we're selling it to a nema. The issue is not that you're selling it to a guy that won't tithe it. The issue is that when this guy is going to tithe it, since he is tamei midrabanan, he's going to make the truma tamei. He's a non-chaver. So you are causing for the truma to become tamei. That's the way we learned the issue. Says the Gemara, Amar Rab Zera, I learned the ganze Mishnah different. And that is, tamei de Bishamai, something even worse. This is mamish gevaldik. Let me say like this. When you sell something, you have to know how the businesses worked, right? We're not speaking about a kabbalah over here. We're speaking about a person selling the product in middle of its ready state. Was there a business that people would buy the olives in the vat, and maybe they themselves will sell it to someone else? A person who's a chaver will never resell to a person who's not neman. A person who's a neman but not a chaver, he's a neman, but maybe he'll sell it to a non-neman. That's the issue according to Beis Shammai. Let's read inside. Let's read over here inside the Mara folder. It's quicker because I really want to get further. Guys, we're in the third last narrow line in the Mara folder. Kama de Beis Shammai, shelo yitiru. This is Beis Shammai. Elo lechaver. A whole different reason. Who said the Eina Chaver Moicher Peiroisav Elalami, the first line under the Gemara in the Mara folder. Elalami Shu Yidei Shuma Aser. A Chaver, aside of the issue of Tumatar, a Chaver will only sell it to a person who's Nema. Avo Im Natir Lim Karoisam Lima Aser. Again, the Beis Shammai is not allowing you to sell it to a Eina Nema. You're selling it to a Neman. Neman means a Ma'aser, but not a Chaver. Second wide line under the Gemara. Dilma, maybe the issue is that Hama'aseh, this guy that bought it, if he would bring it to the final end of the line, if he'll make oil, of course he'll separate the Tumas Umaisis. He's a Neman. But he might resell it. That's the way these businesses work. And a Neman is not Neman to sell it to a Neman. Dilma Hama'aseh Yimkrem La'am Ha'aretz. That's Beis Shammai. However, Beis Hillel Savrei, that Al Yidei Ila, same Ila. Beis Hillel says that if we have to look at, he might sell it. I know the Mitzias, that a person who's only a Neman, but a non-Chaver, might sell it to an Ein Neman. But you know what? The guy might eat it. What's the Ila? The Ila means it's an excuse because the Roiv will either make it into oil or sell it to oil. But the Mishnah, like same thing we learned yesterday, speaking about a small vat, however you define it. This is
Rabbi.
Yes.
Is the selling to someone else? The issue right now we're talking about, is it Shumas and Meisers or is it Tuma and Tyra? I'm not following.
Not Tuma and Tyra. In other words,
so if you sell it to a Neman, isn't he going to separate the tithes before selling it?
Yes, he will.
So what are we afraid? Let him sell to whoever he wants.
No. In other words, he just added another layer of fear. He's not taking away the other issue. We're not saying that there's no issue, that it's going to become tummy. He's adding that there's another element that we have to take into account. And that is that when you sell the olives at that state, there's the way that the halach yelech is that they would resell it. And now we learned for the first time a gavaldic thing. A chaver will only sell to a neman. A neman will sell to an amaretz. And Beis Hillel agrees to that chashash. A neman won't sell it to a neman. Will sell it even to a, which is a problem in itself. And it makes sense to say, like we had in the Bryce on that Nun Testament base, that if it's a big vat where you cannot even apply the ilah, Beis Hillel, you cannot sell the olives to a neman aside of the issue of Tum and Tara, because he might sell it to an Ein Neman. Period. Let's finish. Now, here we had Tznuah Beis Hillel. I want to list, let's finish over. Tznuah Beis Hillel, how do you touch Tznuah? So Mao Tznuah, so the Gemara says Tznuah here means the Ksheidei. And Omer Rab Chizda, huge machlokes. We have 2 minutes. We're going to squeeze it in. Kach Shaninu, right? Or Kan Shaninu. Big difference. Kach Shaninu, Shahach Shanikra Tznuah, or Kan Shaninu. Now, what am I referring to? So let's learn both. Okay, in the Pnei Moshe, 8 lines from the bottom. Amar Rab Chizda Kach Shaninu. So he's quoting the Mishnah says over there, guys, Derech B'nai Yisrael, Nisham Shois B'shnei Eidim, or B'shnei Idim. Right, that after the relation, she makes a bedika, they both wipe themselves, and they're both boidik, the Eidim. Then the Mishnah says that the women that are tsunuos, they're misaknois, a third, and that is that they make the woman makes a bedika before tashmish. How do you define tsunuos? People that are very stringent. Okay, what does it mean they're very stringent? That they're kosher. What are we trying to say with that? In brachos, you remember this? Taf Samach Beis Yakir. The tznuah, the whole thing about tznuah is like a big thing. And when you're maspid someone, you can only say, you want to say they're tznuah. You can only say they're tznuah if they were tznuah Beis Hakisei. In other areas, the word tznuah is used only in the area of modesty in the latrine. with all of the dinim over there, not to be megala so much and not to talk. There's many dinim in the Hilchas Beis HaKisei. So in some areas, the word sanua is exclusive. Look inside the Rashi Elio, just to make the contrast. At the top of the left column, he says it's not kach shaninu. No, it's even geschmacker. He's pointing out that kan shaninu only over here, even though the Mishnah uses the word tsunua beisilo. Tsunua beisilo doesn't mean that the chevra, the talmidei beisilo that were modest in the bathroom, in the latrine, they were the ones that followed the Beis Shammai. It doesn't mean that. Here, the word tsunua means the people that were more frum, the people that were more careful in keeping the mitzvahs. Al derech, we have the word tsunuos in the Mishnah Nida that we just quoted. There, when it says that v'hatznuos misakmis, that not only do they make a bedika after tashmish him and her, but the tsunuos make a bedika before. There, the word tsunua doesn't mean people that are modest in the bathroom. But what Rabbi Chizda is trying to point out, according to Rashi Elio, is you should remember that the word tsunua does not mean the same thing throughout Shas. Over here, clearly, in contrast, so he called the we said over there, there was a person who made his living by giving his fedim. The Nachas Kamed Rav Nachman, I don't know, Rav Nachman was not by the Hesped, if you learn the Gemara there. He met Rav Nachman, and Omar, and he was speaking about someone who passed away. He said, ooh, that person was Sanua be'or Chaysav. Ooh, that guy was Sanua. And the Gemara says over there that Rav Nachman says over there that just like Kishem Shenefroim and Hamesim, when you make a eulogy and you give a compliment to someone who passed away, if that person did not live up to the compliment, that guy will be burned for that. But Rav Nachman added, that's why we, by the burial, many communities, I meaning Lubavitch officially, you're not allowed to give a hesped, but we give a hesped. But if in the part that you can't give a hesped, why do you give a hesped? Because you're Nefroim and Hamesim. Rav Nachman said more. Rav Nachman says that just like you're Nefroim and Hamesim, Kach Nefroim and Hasabdonim. That if you said a compliment that is less than that guy, you're going to make him burn in hell, and so will you. Who told you to say it? So when Rav Nachman heard this guy saying that guy who passed away was Sanua bar Chaysav, so Amalei Rav Nachman, whoa, 1 second. The word Sanua only means Sanua bar Beis HaKisei. And did you ever go with him in the bathroom? Amar Rav Nachman, at island bahadei lebeis HaKisei, did you go with him in the latrine? Do you know? It's Sanua Eloi. The Taninan, because Rav Nachman is saying that in Koyrim Sanua, Elo Lamisha Sanua Beis HaKisei. So really, Rav Nachman is trying to address something. That in other areas, the word sanua means something very limited. It means modest, and not only stam modest, not how long is your kapata, mini skirt kapata, normal kapata, not that. Modest in the latrine. Here, in need that means something else. So that's what Rabbi Chizda is saying. That over here, the word kosher means sanua, but over there in brachas, it doesn't mean that way. To be continued.
Question, or you gone?
Go ahead, quick.
All right, in the case of the tinuk, why don't we say, just like the mom's always nearby and can't avoid hugging the baby, she's also right there to give the baby the food. I mean, that's obvious to me, but it's not mentioned. It's like the odds of the mom not being around is little.
Okay, so let me just word it in not as a question, but as a fact. That if the dough is in an environment where a woman is a nida, then there's the presumption that the dough is a tummy doiraisa because that's lishoil. I think you're right. I think we're speaking about a case where the dough is not in the environment of a woman who's a nida. The dough is in the next door apartment where no one is there, except the baby. It makes a lot of sense.